Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and the Texas Veterans Land Board. We are once again back in the home studio, Southwest Austin, Texas. In these unprecedented times, we look forward to providing a little bit of stability and a little bit of insight about personal and professional development from a veteran's perspective, which in these times, these uncertain moments that we live in, I think you will really enjoy the conversation that we have. I think it'll be really uplifting. Hope that you will continue to share and follow along with our show. Today, my guest is RyanWheat. He is the Stitch Man at Union Leather, the founder, Marine Corps veteran. Ryan, thank you for joining us all the way up in Dallas, Texas. Before we get too deep into it, I'd like to allow you to tell us a little bit about your military experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. 8-year veteran from the United States Marine Corps, 1999 to 2007. Military intelligence. I know it's not a common word to throw out there. There's always the joke that follows. But yeah.
And so did you join from the Dallas area, or how did you end up in Texas?
I did, yeah. Born and raised in Dallas, in fact, my B billet when I was in the Marines was as a recruiter, and I came back to the Dallas area to do that for the final few years that I was in.
And so something that we focus here at Next Gen Warrior is the cultural transition out of the military. And so when somebody looks at your story and they say military intelligence, Marine Corps intelligence, 8 years, and then on the outside of your military service, you decide to start building a leather company. Can you tell us about the mental process, or even maybe the professional process that got you to the point where you wanted to start Union Leather?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny that you asked that, because my transition from military to civilian was actually kind of difficult. And it wasn't difficult, I don't think, for the normal reasons. I mean, I think a lot of veterans may struggle with what I'm about to kind of explain, but I got out and went directly into a civilian job doing technology sales. It was a great job. I still do it today. I'm bivocational, and it helps pay the bills. But when I left the military, there's a certain sense of pride that you carry with yourself. There's a certain level of interest and intrigue that comes naturally from being in the Marine Corps. You could be an admin Marine, not that there's anything wrong with being an admin Marine, but when you tell somebody
Paper
that
pusher, sometimes, as they're called.
oh, absolutely, and they serve the best purposes
Yeah,
possible.
there you go. Yeah, we need them.
But when you tell somebody, when people ask, hey, what do you do? And you say, I'm a Marine, you don't even have to elaborate on what your MOS is. People are instantly, there's a level of respect. They start asking you questions. And when you transition into the civilian world, you notice that people don't really care what you do, right? So you kind of lose a little bit of identity. You start to lose a little bit of purpose. The camaraderie obviously goes away. And so I struggled a lot with that. I also struggled with, did I do enough while I was in? A lot of military veterans that I talk to say, for the most part, if you're going to do, the only guys that did enough, unfortunately, aren't here anymore, right? And so I struggled with that. I wish I had done more during my time that I was in. And so I found myself with kind of idle hands and looking for purpose and looking for something that was very meaningful to me as an individual that I could create and I could build. And so I started looking at kind of the craft community holistically. I started looking at woodworkers, and I got a good friend of mine that's a blacksmith. He makes knives and he hand forges them. And I started to really be attracted to the idea of taking a raw material and trying to make something with it, dedicating yourself to a craft. And I am one of those people that, unfortunately, I get a hobby or something, and a great example is I'll buy a kayak and I'll go once and then it'll sit in the garage. And so I gravitated towards leatherwork because the upfront cost was relatively low. I could invest in enough tools to make the basic things and kind of test the waters. And I found out really quickly that I fell in love with it. And it was one of those things that just captivated my thoughts constantly. And so
Who was the first person that either introduced it to you, or was there a path that kind of led you to working with your hands? Obviously a much different almost side of the brain, as people say, than tech sales.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm kind of interested in that kind of like, how do you go from tech sales and being like, man, I want to, like you, I think we said on the phone before we started recording about old trades and the old trades and craftsmanship. I'm interested how that fits almost into your personality after you got out of the Marine Corps, saying, I'm going to do the tech sales side, and I'm also going to work with my hands and practice this amazing craft.
Yeah. Well, so the Marine Corps, it's funny because a lot of people go, well, I didn't learn something I could apply to the civilian world. Marine Corps recruiter school is sales school, right? And so going into tech sales, the Marine Corps essentially trained me for that, gave me the gift of gab to a certain extent. Yeah. So that was kind of the natural progression for me. Being a crafter isn't something that comes necessarily natural to me. I'm not one of those guys that can fix something around the house. I'll take it apart and then I put it back together and there's always a screw missing or something.
It stays apart at that point?
Absolutely. It stays apart. It never works the same ever again. But the reason why I gravitated towards leather work was really a couple of reasons. One, I fell in love with kind of a Texas leather brand called Saddleback. They're based out of Fort Worth, Texas. And my wife had gotten me a bag, and I was watching all these YouTube videos of their owner talking about kind of the leather craft. And you start to look at it, you start to realize that it's possible. You see a little bit of what they're doing, and you go, well, I could probably do that. And then the beauty of kind of the modern era that we live in is you can get on YouTube, and after enough investment in watching enough videos, learn just about any skill. And so I sat down, I started watching a whole lot of videos. Now, I didn't land on leather work right out of the gate. I actually thought I was going to start forging. I wanted to be a blacksmith because it was a masculine thing to do.
Yeah.
But we live in Texas, and standing over a 2,000-degree furnace didn't seem
on
like
a 105-degree day in the middle of August or September doesn't sound very appealing.
No, not by any stretch. And so I can do leather work from the AC of my home or my shop and not break a sweat. So that's kind of how I landed on leathercraft. What's interesting about the kind of craft community, to your point about old world skills, there seems to be this emergence, or I would even maybe say a resurgence of young crafters, young men and women that see these old school skills. Like, you even see stuff like selvage denim looms that are being resurrected in these old warehouses, or leatherworking or woodworking. And doing it the old way. And so
that was what that is.
I think it's almost a pendulum, right? You look at a few years ago and everything was, and even still now, everything's on our phone. It's not tactile. We can't touch it. And I also think that, you look at kind of the quote unquote millennials, they want there to be purpose and meaning behind what's going on. And when they know that it's handcrafted by an individual, they know that there's a little bit more weight to that product. They'll spend a little bit more for something like that than they would something that's being pumped out of a factory.
Right.
It gives them a little bit more purpose behind what their purchases are. So I think both of those things kind of play into that.
Was leather something that you were good at right away?
No, I approached it a little bit differently than I did most things too, in that I wanted to become proficient with the fundamental steps of leatherworking. I didn't want to jump right in and just make something. Mm-hmm. Some leather workers, they'll say, oh, I knew I wanted to make a camp stool, or I wanted to make whatever, and I made that one thing and it ignited everything for me. For me, I knew I didn't know how to stitch. I'd stitch everything in my shop today by hand. I didn't know how to do that. So instead of making a project, I would come home and I would just stitch lines, straight lines for, feet at a time. Or I'd grab a tool and I would edge bevel with an edge beveler, or I'd stitch groove with a stitch groover, or whatever it was. I would sit and I would use that one tool, and I would become proficient at what the purpose of that particular tool was. And then I started to try to make things and put those skills together. And what I found was, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting connection. I like to make connections between things that oftentimes maybe don't have them. But when you talked about using the tools and like sitting down on your couch and going through them, it reminded me when I was a kid, and I was never good at this, but it was playing piano, and you had to go through the chords. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever played an instrument, but it's like you have to go through the chords, and there's maybe like something else that they kind of teach you. And it's almost like, and I'm interested to hear more about what you had to say from that point. But it's almost like you were learning the chords to music, but you were just learning how to stitch and use your tools to make leather products.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, use your analogy as an example. If somebody said you sit down at a piano and play a song and you didn't know how to play a song, you sat down and you tried to play it, it wouldn't sound very good. Your confidence would drop. You probably wouldn't want to sit down again at that piano and do any more work, right? My fear coming out of the gate was I'm gonna make stuff and it's gonna be so subpar that I'm not gonna want to continue to push on, I think, psychologically. So I wanted to become a master with the tools, with the fundamentals. So once I started to make stuff, it had a certain level of polish that helped build my confidence as I started making stuff.
Were you more patient with yourself with this, if you want to call it at this point a hobby, than you were when you talked about the kayak or whatever pursuits that you had otherwise tried, or even just recreational things? Was there something just different about this than there were other endeavors?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the thing was, but what I noticed with this particular craft was I would wake up every morning, every day, and I would want to do something with related to leatherwork. So I would get up and my mind would just be thirsting for that moment that I could sit down and do something. I could almost equate it to like when I was a kid and I got my first Nintendo.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was get home from school and play that Nintendo.
Yeah.
Obviously not nearly as productive as building a business is. But it was that same kind of deal. All day long, I was daydreaming about trying to get my hands on and do more things. And it just propelled me, that passion or that hunger propelled me to learn more, to try to focus on things that were being taught to me. I wasn't great in school. I normally don't like listening to people teach to me. But when I was passionate about something, I found that it clicked in a way to where I wanted to become better. I wanted to learn. I wanted to progress. And so I did.
I'm always interested at the attempts people make prior to that light bulb going on. And you did have to have attempts, I think, especially for veterans when you get out of the service and you're dealing with a cultural shock. You may be dealing with the wounds of war. You may be living in a different city and not have a support network, social support network around you. But I think it's really important. And if you can, talk about the importance of making attempts, and that they weren't failures for things that maybe you gave up on that led you to your passion for leather.
Yeah, I think what's critical, and there's a couple of people, in fact, I posted on my Instagram a few weeks ago, one of the first wallets I ever made. I mean, it really did not look good at all. It was really, really, really bad. And
Were you a little worried about posting it? You're like, oh man, I might lose some followers over this one.
I waited until I knew it was a good throwback. You know, I had a good base for it. But what I think what's interesting is the way that confidence for me has really been solidified in this. It hasn't been so much about me as an individual, but as the collective of folks that I've surrounded myself with and how it's propelled me forward. And it's done a few things, right? So the first thing is even just people that I know in real life, as I was making stuff and I look back on my early stuff and I don't think it's that great now, but I had a lot of people that encouraged me. They said, hey, that's pretty neat. And then some of the first things that I sold came by way of people seeing what I had been making and the encouragement of going, man, I think that looks so good. I want one of those and I'll pay you money for it. The second thing I did though was surround myself with other makers that were at similar and a little bit better levels than I was at. And what it did was, one, I could learn from the guys that were better than me. And they weren't so far out of reach that it was unattainable. And then I surrounded myself with guys that were struggling very similar to what I was going through, right? So as I started to build this into a business, if I would have lulls or downtimes and orders or whatever, we would talk to each other and we'd help each other from a marketing perspective. Or sometimes the encouragement's just, hey, the industry right now is down. It's not going to be as good as it is in December. And so as you started to kind of learn from one another and grow off of one another, and it's really that collective group of people that's been more valuable to me than even almost learning the trade or the money that I'm making as a result. But I wouldn't be where I'm at right now if I didn't have that support structure around me.
So do you think, I'm always interested in making connections to things, but I'm also interested in kind of the different sides of people. Do you think you would be or do you think you operate better as a leather person because you have a sales job, or maybe, like vice versa? Do they in some way help, not just like help each other, but do they help you as a person, like accessing and exercising those different parts of either your personality or social relationships, uh, from that perspective?
Yeah. So both definitely build off and support one another for various reasons. The first is, and I actually now lead a team of people for my day job. And one thing I'm real big with the folks that I lead is making sure that they identify and nurture passions outside of the workplace. There's a certain level of joy and happiness that comes from that pours over into your professional life, your day job, right? And so I think that that's a healthy thing for anybody, whether you're gonna. And I'm doing this now as a business, but if you're wanting to do it as a hobby, if it awakens something in you, then go for it, because I think that it's a critically important thing. But from a professional standpoint, I'm a married guy. I've got a newborn baby. I've got lights I've got to keep on. And there's something that happens when you flip the switch from something being a passion to being provision, where it's either sink or swim. And if it starts to fail, then that passion can get sucked out really, really quickly. And now it becomes a burden. And so knowing that I'm going to have food on the table because I've got supplemental income is helpful, because it helps me maintain a certain level of passion with what I'm doing on a daily basis on the leather side of things.
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting kind of breakdown of the way both of those things even work with inside of you to support each other, and also to give you some purpose for the different things that you do. So now I know we've kind of gone through the passion side and the personal side of it. Talk to us about how you got your first order. I mean, you're obviously, you go from trying different things and then you find something you love, and then now you're in the mode of trying to produce sales, to build a business, to even do the technical things like developing a website or doing things to try to push your brand out there.
Yeah. So what's interesting is when I first started this, I really was trying to fulfill something internally within myself, right? And as I started to make stuff, people would see it and they'd go, I started an Instagram and I would start posting stuff, not to sell anything, but just to kind of walk people through my journey. And people started seeing it. I'd either get direct messages on Instagram, or I'd have friends and family that would go, hey, that's pretty cool. Like, can you make me one of those? And I'd say, yeah, sure, I can make you one. And they go, well, how much? And I didn't even know pricing,
Huh.
and I would ask them, I'd say, well, what would you pay for it? And they'd tell me a dollar amount, and I would register that as I can buy a whole nother side of leather or whatever. And so it slowly started to kind of build up momentum. And I was really getting to a point where I wanted to try to make it a full-time thing. I really wanted to try to make this a career for myself. And I've got, much larger vision and aspirations for where I want Union to land. But at that particular point, I was trying to think of what my $1 million idea was going to be.
Yeah.
And so I came up with, I wanted to do a coaster. I thought, if I can come up with a really cool, clever coaster, maybe that'll sell. I'll sell millions of coasters. What I had worked up in my mind. And so I'm a very basic graphic designer, not by trade by any stretch. And I designed a coaster. It actually, the phrase on the front says, "Raise them high and bold, boys. Hold tight to your souls, boys." And it was a toast from World War II. And so I made the graphic. I got the stamp. I made a set of the coasters. And I've got a really good friend of mine that's a photographer, and reached out to him and said, hey, would you mind taking some pictures for our website for this $1 million idea for these coasters? And he said, absolutely, sure. And so the next day he was working with a marketing agency here in Dallas, and he was on a photo shoot with them, and he noticed there were these whiskey bottles all over the place. And he asked if he could borrow one to take back for the photo shoot for my coasters. And they said, absolutely. So long story short, he takes the picture. He shows them the photo the next day, and it looked so good. They were like, we're working with that whiskey company, and we would love to use those coasters as part of their value-added packaging for Christmas. So he calls me up and he says, hey, would you be willing to make some coasters for this whiskey company? It's called Yellow Rose.
The whiskey company?
Yellow Rose down in Houston, Texas. First legal distillery in Houston.
Wow, awesome. Okay.
And so I said, sure, give them, they can give my number. They can call me up. And what's interesting about this is I make a lot of my goods by hand, and those coasters I was cutting out literally by hand, each one. It would take me about 20 minutes to make a coaster set. So I get the phone call from this marketing agency the next day, and they said, hey, can you make us some coasters? And in my mind, I'm thinking it's going to be 150, 200 coasters, maybe. And I said, well, how many do you need? And they said, well, we need 6,500 coaster sets.
Oh my gosh.
Which is what, 30,000.
So they didn't lowball you, huh?
No, they came right out of the gate. And so I didn't want to show my cards. I kept my poker face. And I said, well, I need to crunch the numbers. I need to figure out, a few things in order to see how fast do you need them. And this was, I think,
some business mumbo jumbo to just, try to use the verbiage and everything. Like, I'm just going to have to run the numbers and check my budget, make sure that.
Absolutely. Buy some time, make them think that I'm much further along than I am.
Make sure that I can give you the quality that you deserve. And, it's going to take me a little bit of time.
100%. And so I remember hanging up the phone, and I made two phone calls immediately. One was to a good friend of mine. It's a leather crafter. And I said, hey, man, just out of curiosity, is this possible? And they need it really quick. They need it turned around in 90 days. I am cutting these out by hand. And he said, no, there's no way you can't do it. So my second call was to my wife, and she's the realist in our relationship. So I thought, okay, she's going to validate what my buddy just told me. And she said, no, you got to figure out how to make it happen. This is too good of an opportunity to pass on. So we told them yes, and we started investing. We used that first order to invest in. If you can see, that's a 22-ton hydraulic press that's back here that's been operated. And you can actually see some of the straps in the background there that we're working on for the whiskey.
So the logistics of it, or the steps that went through, were you created something, someone else wanted it, they paid you, you took the money to purchase the equipment, and then use the equipment to follow through on the order.
Yeah, I got real lucky in that, and I, again, tried to play it up like I had done this before. I said, our normal terms of service are 50% deposit up front, 50% at delivery of goods, and I tried to frame it up in a way that sounded really official. And they said, well, we don't normally do 50% up front, but we're willing to make an exception for this. And so I got just enough. I knew what my hard costs were built into that 50% up front, and it enabled me to be able to invest in the tools in order to crank that order out. So 6,500 coaster sets, which was really about 30,000 pieces, turned into their on-bottle branding, which are neck wraps that go around the bottle of their Outlaw bourbon. And we do probably 100,000 of those for them annually now. And then that ended up parlaying into an introduction with Desert Door Distilling, which they make Sotol out of Driftwood, Texas. Yep. And we do their on-bottle branding for them as well. So we do a lot of work. There's a lot of after hours and late nights and early mornings trying to maintain both jobs. And then obviously the level of quality that these folks deserve.
Yeah, well, big shout out to Judd Kaufman over at TerraDep for putting us in touch. And he's also on the board and part of the founding group over at Desert Door. You enjoy obviously working with leather. Now you've got some orders coming in, and then you get introduced to Desert Door, right? Is that kind of how your business has progressed?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and even to back up a little bit on kind of what my secret sauce is for success. I've always prescribed to kind of the school of thought that if you're good to people, they're going to be good to you. And so, and even to back up a little bit, that photographer that took those pictures for me, that's his job. I didn't have money to pay him for that. And when I met him for the first time, I told him that. I said, here's the vision for my business. But I know I can't engage you today. And he said, man, I'd love to do it for you out of the goodness of my heart. And he just volunteered to do some of that early marketing photography for me. It was his relationship with the marketing agency that helped me out. And so it's relational. None of this was me going out and actively trying to force my product into anybody's hands. I really just tried to be good to all the folks that I was coming in contact with, and it paid dividends for me.
Yeah.
Desert Door was at a liquor like expo, and they saw our wraps on the yellow rose bottles, and their marketing team reached out to me. I think they found us by way of Instagram and saw that we were both veteran-run organizations, and so they reached out and wanted to see if we could help them out.
That's awesome. So what are you doing then? If you have now to almost meet a certain expectations for your clients or the people that you're working with, is there something that you're working on for fun? Is there a product that you're excited about creating in the future?
Yeah, so it's funny that you asked that. I wish that I had more opportunity to do that. Sometimes you got to be careful what you ask for. And so as we've built, one thing that has impacted us, as it's impacted a lot of businesses, has been COVID-19. And so we have a few folks that are normally in the shop with us. A lot of it's family run. My dad's retired. And I've got a couple. One's a veteran, actually a kid that I recruited when I was in the Marine Corps that comes and helps me out. But the problem is with the COVID shutdown, and my shop is part of my home, we haven't been able to have that additional assistance. So we've been kind of full bore lately to meet customer orders. It's going to sound really ridiculous. One of my most recent kind of things that I for whatever reason, wanted to figure out was a baseball. So
do you have one there?
I wanted to make a cool custom baseball. So yeah, it's the first one, hand cut, hand sewn.
Man, if you guys are listening to this on audio and you don't have the video, you are missing out. Go to @Voices of Vets, because that is super cool, man. Check out that baseball. How long does something like that take?
That took, so obviously the design portion of it takes a few hours, and so this is part of trying to feed that passion that I had never done a baseball stitch, was really what kind of started it. And so
curiosity about how the process is.
Yeah, you look at a baseball and you go, that's pretty cool. And my mind now, I look at that baseball and I go, well, where does that stitch line start? Where does that stitch line finish? How do they do it in a way to where you can't see any? What's the hidden magic behind that? Can
you hold it back up for the camera again? I'm interested to take a longer look at it. So can you kind of explain where that starts and stops?
Yeah, well, so very similar to a saddle stitch, which is what we do on a majority of our products. It's one solid piece of thread, but you're sewing with two different needles, right? And you're going through holes kind of at the same time in order to make almost a double layer stitch. So that's essentially what a baseball is. And so the start of the stitch line is solid. It's not going to have a snip into it because of that single thread. And then what you do is you essentially get to the end or your last stitch line, and very similar to a back stitch for any leather crafters that are out there, you do the same thing, but you kind of loop it and pull it, and then you tuck it. This isn't telling you guys anything.
Technical skill. This is incredible. Yeah. This is going like right over my head, but I love the look. I'm interested to hear about it though.
You should probably Google a video that actually shows. But when you get to the final stitch, and I don't even know if I can find the final stitch.
That's what I was interested to see, if you can show like where it stops and it starts, or if
I am that good.
Identify. I know it's too seamless.
Yeah, you can actually. I think I found it, and I kind of botched it a little bit, so you can kind of see there's a little key. I don't know if you can notice it.
So there's something like that on every baseball.
Every baseball, they loop it and then they feed it through. So like they'll get the needle and they'll stick it through here and they'll tug it real tight, and it'll pull it. It pulls it up underneath the leather, and then they clip it and it's hidden underneath. And the pressure of the ball is what holds it. There's no knot, which is kind of fascinating, right? It's just the tension of the thread keeps it from coming undone.
Man, you got any other cool things back there to show us? You just kicked a class on us, like military. Like I'm gonna kick your class on
leather Texas. That's a big hit. Wow. Leather Texas pads. I like doing things though. Kind of my next project's gonna be a bag. I really want to do a bag. I do hand sew everything, so it takes me a little while. A long stitch line on a bag like that will take me days of sewing. Yeah. But I've got some old World War II medical kits that I'm gonna try to mimic them after. So it's really the next mountain I want to tackle. So
for folks at home, where can they find your product, website, or social media?
Yeah, so unionleather.co, unionleather.co. no M on the end of it. Don't know why I made that decision when I registered the name, because it can be so confusing, but unionleather.co, www.unionleather.co. And then at Union Leather Co. is our Instagram, which is really where a majority of our posts are made.
Okay.
And then you can find us on facebook.com/Union Leather Co.
Before we close it out here, anything, any last words or any thing that you would like to leave our guests with today that we didn't get to address?
Yeah, I would just say for anybody that's out there, I still deal with a whole lot of veterans. I try to stay in touch with a lot of the kids that I recruited. And, the one thing that I see that's probably the most paralyzing or prevents more veterans than anything from doing things that are going to end up making them obviously happy and passionate as well as successful is just starting, right? Get going. Whatever you've got to do. If it's watching YouTube videos, start watching those YouTube videos. If it's enrolling in school and using that GI Bill, do it. There is absolutely nothing that's going to kill your dreams more than being stagnant.
Absolutely, man. I 100% agree with that. And obviously it's a message certainly for these times as we've been at home. And I think sometimes it's good just to give people that extra push and that extra encouragement to go out and pursue the dreams and the things that they enjoy doing, because there's almost nothing that we're better at than the things that we enjoy doing. So thanks for sharing your passion with us. Thanks for sharing your story with us and for encouraging the veterans who are in your circle. It's a great example for, veterans who are listening to this show, and will definitely take those words of advice. Thank you for being with us today, Ryan.
Absolutely. I've got to do one more thing, and it's thank you guys. So the reason why Union exists as a name is because we are located in Union Valley, Texas. The only reason why we have this little corner of dirt here is because we were lucky enough to stumble across the Veteran Land Board many, many years ago.
Wow.
And get a loan for this property that we're on out here. So kind of a unique thing, but man, thank you and your organization for that, because there wouldn't be any union if there wasn't a Veteran Land Board.
Hey, thank you so much for saying that. I think you brought this totally full circle. I mean, Veterans Land Board does so many great things for veterans, and we don't discuss that as much on here as we should. But just like Ryan said, land loans, and home improvement loans. And I'm glad that you were able to access our services. And it feels great to have a piece of dirt in Texas, doesn't it?
100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us today, Ryan. For everybody at home who is listening, on behalf of Chairman George P. Bush, the Texas Veterans Land Board, and myself, we want to encourage you to stay invested in your communities, to continue to be a positive force in your communities, in your cities, across Texas and across the nation. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting Next Gen Warrior. We will talk to you next time.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.